today, I bet you're thinking, this video looks different. We're not at school. You're right. We are in my house. You're in my kitchen. Because what we're going to do today, it was easier to come home and video what we're going to do instead of taking everything we see here to school. And today we're going to learn about, first let's back up. Do you remember when we learned about colonial people in their town and the jobs in their towns? One of the main jobs were millers and bread and bakers. Well, the millers were the people who were grinding wheat. And so we're going to talk about grinding wheat, and the bakers are the people who baked the bread and the good things that we like to eat in the town. And so we're going to talk about all of those things today. And so first we'll talk about the miller, because we have to get the flour before we bake. So back in colonial times, they started with, and we still do today, but we don't usually see this part in the store, they started with something called wheat berries. And can you hear? You can hear they're hard, they're small, and they're like little seeds. And so when they would harvest the wheat berries from the wheat plant, this is what they would get, and this is how they look. And you can see, and they're just tiny, tiny, like little seeds. And it would take a really long time to grind these up to make flour. And so a lot of the farmers would like to take them into town to the miller, and we learned to the miller so that they could grind the flour, and we learned that they usually had mills that were by rivers because the power from the river would run the mill. And so I'm going to show you grinding wheat, and one of the things that they used were grindstones like this. Well, in the mill house, the grindstones were huge. They were great big so that they could do a lot of flour at once. These are little grindstones for my wheat grinder right here, and when they turn like this, they grind the wheat they grind the berries into the wheat. They break them up and make it into flour. So I'm going to show you how to do that right here. I have a wheat grinder, and this wheat grinder, you grind the wheat by turning the handle. And so I'm going to pour some of my wheat berries in. That looks good. I poured some of my wheat berries in, and now I'm going to grind it. And it takes, and you can make a setting on your wheat grinder of how fine you want it or how thick you want your wheat. And there we go, we're going to go this direction. And you can see it takes a lot of work. If we were at school, I would bring this to school and I would let you guys grind the wheat so you could see how much time it would take. And can you see the flour coming out of the wheat grinder? I'm making flour with my wheat berries. And so the farmers, they would take their flour to the millers, and the millers could mill flour way faster than I am right now because they had big grindstones and a big operation to do it in. So you can see why they took it to the miller, because they didn't have time to stand there all day, and they didn't even all have wheat grinders that have a handle. Sometimes they had to use rocks to break it up and grind it up, and that would take forever. Now, a way that we can grind wheat, another way that I grind wheat, I can use a machine that's a lot easier than using my wheat grinder. And all I have, this is where I pour my wheat berries in, and all I have to do is pour them into the top, like this, and turn my machine on. And now I have the setting on really big to make big pieces of grain, but I can make it smaller and turn my machine on. See, and that makes it kind of coarse, but I can do it a couple times and make it really fine. And isn't that easier than grinding it by itself? It is, because when we make bread, we need a lot of flour. And usually when I make a recipe of bread, I need 6 cups. That means I need about this much flour. Think about how long that would take to make that much flour out of wheat berries. It takes a really long time. So no wonder the farmers took their wheat berries to the miller to get ground up. And I've already made some bread, so I can show you what their bread making looked like. And they would make pretty basic bread that had water, flour, salt, and yeast. And the yeast makes the bread rise. So this is what yeast looks like. And I already I made some dough right here. Now and the yeast makes the dough rise. See how my dough has risen up over the bowl? This dough has not risen as much as this dough. And so it takes time. It takes like maybe an hour or so for your bread to rise. And so you need the yeast in there to help your bread rise and make it the way so that you can bake it. And so I have flour. I have dough that hasn't risen yet. I have dough that has risen. And then I have bread that I have baked. I'm going to take it out of my pot here. And there is my bread that I have baked. And you're probably looking at the pot that I baked my bread in because it may not be what you expect. This is called a Dutch oven, and it's made out of cast iron. And if you remember when we learned about the blacksmiths, they made things out of iron. So a blacksmith could have made you a pot out of iron. Well, these pots are very, very strong. And since the colonial people didn't have ovens like we do, they would have to put them over their fire or their hearth like we learned about, put their bread dough inside, put their lid on, and they would hang their pot over the fire to bake their bread. And so I baked this bread in the pot today so that you could see how it would look. And when the bread bakes, it kind of takes the shape of the pot, and that's why it looks kind of flat and round instead of like a regular loaf of bread like we're used to seeing. So, and if we were at school, we would make the bread and everybody would get to taste it. But at least I get to show you from home. So boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed learning about grinding the wheat, making the bread, the kind of pots that they used, and maybe you have these things and you guys could do it at home too. Have fun, boys and girls.